Good morning. So this round is all about Danielle, who over the last 2 years was working very hard on her master's degree. And in order to put it in her work in the context, she enlisted a couple of friends to introduce the subject and frame it. So I will start, and David Jaffray will follow, and you don't need to pay too much attention to us as long as you pay attention to what Danielle says. So as you know, we have a lot of information now about the global burden of disease. There was a very famous study by the Global Burden of Disease group from Seattle that looked at the causes of death in the world, both in 1990 and then the study was repeated in 2010. And if you look at these two graphs, this is 1990, this is 2010, you can see there's less of the yellow stuff and there's more of the red stuff and the green stuff. These are deaths to infections and diarrheal disease and in the world. And this is the developed countries, high income and low income countries. So we can see that this predominates in the low and middle income countries. But there's fewer deaths distinctly. And the red stuff, dark red, is cancer. So there's more of cancer. And still, predominantly the problem in high-income countries, but there's also more cancer in low-income countries. This is actually war and disasters. And this is cardiovascular disease. And in many countries, cancer now is #1 cause of death. It is in Canada. And if it's not #1, it's #2, #3. And with the increased life expectancy, and cancer being the disease of aging, what we have is tsunami of cancer is coming. And the data from IARC and projections suggest that if now, in 2015, there's about 15 million new cancer cases in the world, by 2035, it'll be 24 million. As you can see, it will increase everywhere, but there will be a modest increase in more developed countries, and because most of the world lives in the less developed countries, the majority of this increase will be in less developed countries who are very ill prepared to deal with this problem. And you can see that when you look at the more developed countries and less developed regions, when you get cancer in more developed countries, more than half people will survive, but if you get cancer in less developed countries, most people will die. So cancer control requires a multitude of interventions, and we all know that you need to pay attention to all of these. This cancer control is really multifactorial, and we know that the essential services for cancer, besides prevention, really require accurate diagnosis. So you need to have pathology services, laboratory medicine, imaging. You need to have surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and palliative care. So you need it all in order to control cancer. So today we're going to talk about radiotherapy and this map of the world from IEA, which looks at the number of people served by radiotherapy unit. It's a very old information. It's been shown over and over again that, vast majority of the world where people live, huge populations, Southeast Asia and Africa, and some South America have really either no radiotherapy or very poor access to radiotherapy. So why are we talking about it now? It's been known for decades. Well, you never know. Somebody maybe start listening right now. And in 2011, there was a United Nations high-level meeting on non-communicable diseases. It was only ever second United Nations high-level meeting on healthcare. There were high-level meetings on many other things. The first one was on HIV/AIDS, which was now more than a decade ago, more about 15 years ago. And it really resulted in a huge amount of investment into HIV/AIDS and the dropping mortality and improved survival. So this was on non-communicable diseases, and it resulted in response from WHO, and Global Action Plan was published, which is going from 2013 to 2020. And I'd like you to pay attention to the resolutions that were put in place. A 25% relative reduction in the risk of premature mortality from cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease. That's the commitment And 80% availability of affordable basic technologies and essential medicines, including generics, required to treat major non-communicable diseases. So subject to interpretation what major technologies are. And the WHO has responded in the last few years, passed a number of resolutions. There was passed a resolution on palliative care, access to essential medicines. In fact, the essential medicines list now recommended by WHO includes all the major cancer drugs. It's a very rich list. Just this year, there was a resolution on strengthening emergency and essential surgical anesthesia. So far, no WHO resolution on radiotherapy. And just 3 weeks ago, United Nations passed the Sustainable Development Goals. They replaced Millennium Development Goals that finished in this year, 2015. This is going to 2030. And as you can see from that, it's far-ranging series of development goals that include environment and poverty. But number 3 is the one that we're interested in. It's good health and well-being for all. And number 3 has some bullets that promise that by 2030, reduce by 1/3 premature mortality from NCDs through prevention and treatment, and achieve universal health coverage, including financial protection, access to quality essential health services, access to safe, effective, quality, affordable essential medicines, vaccines for all. So it's subject to interpretation what essential health services are and how you're going to achieve just basically in 15 years a 1/3 reduction in premature mortality. But somebody is interesting in saying how we're going to do it. So will Sustainable Development Goals be achieved? Well, there are 2 views. There's the pessimist view, never, it's only 15 years. And then there's optimist view. And the optimist view is even if they're not achieved, they will stimulate investment in healthcare. They will stimulate investment in all these criteria, and the progress will be made. So do we actually have evidence that investing in health works? There was this very nice Lancet commission on Global Health 2035 that was published a couple of years ago, and they called it Great Convergence in Health. And what they documented is the decrease in under 5 mortality, so deaths per 1,000 live births of children under 5 years of age. And this is the curve between 1991 and now in the countries with the lowest child mortality, and this is the curve in the countries with highest child mortality. What they estimated, if you continue to work at the same pace and make improvements as you've been doing for the last 20 years, 25 years, then by 2035, the odds of child surviving the 5 years of life will be the same all over the world. And that's called the Grand Convergence Health. So, and those are the 4 key messages from this commission. They think it's achievable. They think that there's returns in investing in health, and investing in health not only depends on investing by a country, but also development assistance, the assistance from rich countries to other countries. And they've said that the case has been made that the economic benefit from investing in health actually outweighs the cost. So the question is this true for radiotherapy?
Thanks, Danielle, for being a friend. And so Mary's laid out very clearly the challenge of identifying, what's the scale of investment in radiotherapy that will be required as the tsunami of cancer grows between now and 2035. She's also kind of raised the question of, does it make sense to make the investment? And if it makes sense to make the investment, how big is that investment? And what does the return look like? So this calculation has never been done before. So a team of individuals from around the planet worked very hard over the past 2 years to try to pull together the facts to allow us to put some concrete numbers around this. So we have to sort of, simplify this a little bit given the time constraints. And we ask some simple questions: what is the global demand, and what is the benefit? So global demand, we'll talk about linking off of global estimates for cancer occurrence, as Mary plotted in that graph, going to some 24 million by 2035. What is the benefit? How can we understand if we applied radiotherapy to those cancer patients for which is appropriate to be treated, what would be the benefit in terms of survival and local control? Then what are the resources needed to put in place to actually execute on that evidence-based appropriateness of intervention? What resources do we have now? How much radiotherapy capacity is there worldwide? And how much will we need by 2035, so-called gap? And then what would it cost to close that gap? So we have a cancer patient for which we know evidence suggests that that patient should receive radiotherapy for a benefit, which we can document. How we put the infrastructure in place to treat that patient with radiotherapy. How do we pay every day to put those fractions and deliver that care? And how much does that add up to over now to 2035? That calculation is fairly complex. So to understand demand and benefit, we used evidence-based or eBest approaches, characterized very well by Barton et al. And well published. And they looked at evidence-based practice to determine when a patient has cancer, whether radiotherapy intervention is appropriate, and what the corresponding improvement in terms of likelihood of 5-year survival would be. That means for every cancer patient, which we know grows to 24 million over the next few decades, we can calculate then the proportion of new cancers that have an indication for radiotherapy. An indication for radiotherapy is a clinical situation for which radiotherapy is a treatment of choice. Based on evidence, radiotherapy provides better outcome as an alternative to other treatment modalities. And can the patient undergo radiotherapy? So this calculation is possible using this radiotherapy utilization rate. So given a cancer patient, a number of patients with cancer, how many patients should receive radiotherapy as they are to you? And so this is from the report, some of the figures from the report was shown throughout the presentation. And we calculated for each country around the world, recognized countries that is, what the radiotherapy utilization rate would be in that country, given the spectrum of radiotherapy in that spectrum of cancers in that country. And we plotted this as a function of expenditure of health per person spent in each of those countries. And it shows that regardless of where you are, and regardless of the economic status of the country, radiotherapy utilization rates based on evidence sit around 50+%. There is a spread, of course, of variability, but the key factor is around 50% of all radiotherapy, all cancer patients should receive radiotherapy according to the eBest methodology. So what does that mean? We can roll this out. We know the total cancer occurrence worldwide, but we know the number of fractions on average that we treat for those patients. We can actually calculate them by disease or by average. And we can roll this all up. This is a very large calculation that in 2012, some 7 million indications, suggesting some 119 million fractions in 2025, being delivered in 2025, if we had full support. And 1.5 million local controls, summing up to 580,000 lives. By 2035, this rolls up to 12 million indications, 204 million fractions being required to be delivered worldwide, 2.5 million local controls, and almost 1 million lives associated with the investment. So this kind of gives us the scale of the problem. Now, what are the solutions to that problem in terms of understanding how do we address the current capacity to deliver radiotherapy and deliver on the scale that we see some 204 million per year that has to be delivered worldwide. So we define this sort of shortfall, the difference between currently available and that needed worldwide to optimally deliver necessary patients with cancer. So how do we come up with a cost model? So we actually took a very detailed activity-based costing models that were first developed by the IAEA. And we use those to understand what the cost is, literally down to the cost of doing QA in conformal radiotherapy, for example. And we build on a number of different cost models that deal with IMRT, back to CRT, and so on and so forth. And we went through it in gory detail, because that gory detail allows us to do some explorations that I'll talk about later on automation and efficiency to lower those costs. But you need to know the details to see where automatic planning may lower the cost, for example. And so we had to come up with a nominal model, which is, we imagine, because of economies of scale, we don't want to think about half a machine somewhere that doesn't work. And we don't want to necessarily assume 16 machines somewhere, because I'm not sure that's perfectly efficient either. Okay? So we came up with a simple model, 2 megavoltage treatment units, 1 CT simulator, 3D CRT capable planning system, appropriate dosimetry QA equipment, facility layout and size, and all down to scale, cost per square foot, differential according to the different economic regions based on G and I. We also looked at staff in terms of requirements, assuming optimal equipment use. We ran some operational parameters like 12 operating hours per day, 4 fractions per hour. We also included all the amortization costs in terms of making sure that if money was coming in to treat those patients, that there could be some savings in those ecosystems to keep that infrastructure moving forward. The costs are based on IEA references for infrastructure. We tried to figure out the costing, which is very challenging in terms of worldwide differentials in cost of training and manpower using a Delphi question. So there's a lot of detail that goes into this, and I encourage you to read the report, but it kind of gives you a feel for the scale of the resources that will be needed 20 years from now. So the top numbers of fractions, this is the one that sums to some 204 million fractions. The number of radiotherapy departments, the number of megavoltage machines and CT scanners is quite staggering. Actually, even more staggering is the over 200,000 trainees that need to be trained in the context of radiation oncology, medical physics, and radiotherapy. This does not include common services like pathology or radiology. They also have to be there. We felt it was important to separate those so others could come in and work together. If we pulled them together, we couldn't dissect the elements, so we kept focused on radiotherapy. So the training is quite remarkable on its own. So we went through a model then, because what Danielle's going to want to do, and she'll go into detail, is to understand if we start to actually invest to make this happen. She needs some key numbers. One is how much does it cost to build infrastructure to do radiotherapy? And then how much does it cost to deliver each fraction? Those are the two numbers we're going to pass on to Danielle, and she'll describe how she uses those. So upfront costs to develop a new facility, the investment in construction, equipment, human resource training costs, and then operating costs, human resources, maintenance, consumables, overhead, and the amortization costs that allow those facilities to continue to operate and refresh as time goes forward. After a lot of boiling down on this kind of a scale of calculation, these are the sample numbers, for example. Operating cost per fraction in high-income countries, $235 US. This is in 2015 numbers. Upper middle, lower middle, and low-income countries have a substantial drop, largely because of manpower differentials. Upfront cost per fraction is around $803. So if you wanted to build a facility that could treat, let's say, 200,000 fractions a year, you could take the 200,000 and multiply it by 803, and that's roughly how much capital you need to build that infrastructure to get it going. And then each fraction that comes through will be rolling through at 235. In our environment, at the lower end of the domains. And we explored some of the other variations around it. So these numbers are key for Danielle's initiative. So this is a very quick roll-up of a lot of work, just so you understand. So a huge increase in the number of radiotherapy indications from 7 to 12 million cases by 2035. Radiotherapy is an effective treatment modality, providing 2.5 million local controls and saving 1 million lives a year by 2035. Important inequities in access, which we'll highlight a little later, and investing in capital and human resources is clearly needed. So the question is now, if we have these numbers, can we run a calculation, look at the rate of investment, and use those lives saved to calculate what the return is? So now we have investment and return. So I'll hand over to Danielle, and this is her master's work. It's pretty cool. And she did this simultaneously with doing her residency, which is also pretty cool. So Danielle.
So you've just heard about the rapidly rising number of cancer cases in low and middle income countries and really worldwide. And you've heard about the urgent need to develop a global cancer control strategy and one that includes radiotherapy. And we've just heard about how we can estimate what the global need for radiotherapy is and how much it would cost to deliver. And so I'd now like to talk about how we can integrate all of this information and develop an investment case for radiotherapy, a formalized, integrated, and numerically based approach to decision-making that really allows policymakers to compare how to make the best use of scarce resources. And before I begin, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge, firstly, my co-presenters, without which none of this would have been possible, and who were really innovators with this task force and in assembling a really global group. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Milosevic and Dr. O'Sullivan, who were key members of the Toronto Operations Group, and especially Tracy Liu, who's the manager at Tecna and who I worked very closely with and who was very helpful in getting all of these numbers together. Everyone here was certainly my cheerleaders behind all of this. So this is a chart from the paper, and it shows the radiotherapy coverage worldwide, and it correlates radiotherapy coverage, which is the ability of countries to deliver radiotherapy to their populations and correlates it with gross national income. And we can see a strong correlation between radiotherapy coverage and GNI, with over 90% of people in low-income countries unable to access radiotherapy services. And those are those red dots in the far left corner there are the low-income countries with very low radiotherapy coverage levels.
Where's Canada?
Not shown directly, but it's up in the high-income countries in the blue circles on the far right corner.
Above Japan, between the U.S. and Japan.
Somewhere there, yeah. Yeah. This is a graph that shows the regional variation in coverage, and you can see there are stark inequalities in countries' ability to deliver radiotherapy resources. And I think one of the most striking things about this graph is the white regions in Africa, and those are countries that are unable to deliver any radiotherapy capacity. But I think you can see that there's many regions in the world that are not able to meet the needs of their populations. And there's many myths and misconceptions that underlie a lot of these inequalities. People believe that radiotherapy is too complicated, too expensive, and really not needed in many parts of the world, and they perpetuate what we see in this graph. But I hope that everyone in this room can begin to appreciate that scientific and clinical advances mean that worldwide radiotherapy services can be highly standardized, effectively applied, safely delivered, consistently and feasibly scaled up, and affordable. But how do we translate these messages to the people holding the purse strings? Very often we're preaching to the choir. We all recognize in this room the importance and value of radiotherapy. But to a finance minister who has one pot of resources, how do we convince them that radiotherapy is a good investment? We need to show that investments in health lead to far broader benefits in terms of social benefits and economic benefits, and that these are all mutually reinforcing. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that increases in foreign direct investment closely follow improvements in population health. To begin, we first wanted to cost globally what it would take to deliver optimal radiotherapy coverage by 2035. We looked at where countries were today in 2015, and we looked at a linear model of investment where we slowly and incrementally increased radiotherapy capacity out to optimum levels by 2035. These numbers may seem large, but they're actually looking at entire regions of the world. So when we look at low-income countries using an efficiency model, which is one of the costing models that David has just described, the total cost of delivering radiotherapy capacity to optimum levels by 2035 is $14 billion in low-income countries, $33 billion in lower middle, and almost $50 billion in upper middle income countries, for a total of almost $100 billion. Using the nominal model that was presented earlier, the total cost is a little bit higher at $184 billion. But what do we get for that cost? Actually, the results are very impressive. When we look at life years that can be saved over this 20-year period of incremental investment, we see that in low-income countries, we would save 6.3 million life years, almost 10 million life years in lower middle-income countries, and 10.7 million life years in upper middle-income countries, for a total of 26.9 million. This is a huge benefit. When we look at clinical trials and small, incremental improvements in survival, these are huge numbers that we can achieve. In order to translate these numbers into economic benefits, we've used two different approaches. One is called the human capital approach, and it's a way of looking at the benefits from labor force participation and productivity as a result of deaths avoided from cancer. So when we treat a patient with radiotherapy and we put them back into the workforce, how do they contribute to the gross domestic product of a country? And the second is called a full income approach, which is the value in a particular country or region of a 1-year potential increase in life expectancy. And both are calculated through effects on gross domestic product. And this is our investment case. This is a graph that's shown from the paper, and the two lines here going across the graph reflect the two different costing models. And the purple line reflects the nominal model of a radiotherapy package, and the green line reflects the efficiency model. And the bars on the graph reflect the benefits. We see the full income benefits in the blue, and the human capital benefits or labor productivity benefits in the red. And as we can see, when we look at the human capital benefits, we see a very strong return on investment using the efficiency model almost immediately. And using the nominal model, we see a return on our investment in just over 10 years. Looking at full income benefits, we see an almost immediate return on our investment. We see immediate returns on the social and human and economic benefits on a country. And this is another way of looking at the benefits. And I think one of the things to take away from this graph is that we have to choose the right technology package for the right region and for the right income level and level of development of a country. We can see at the bottom our return on investment, looking at the human capital and full income approach. And in low-income countries, when we choose an efficiency model of radiotherapy delivery, we have an almost 100% return on our investment. And this goes up. In upper middle-income countries, we have an almost 600% return on our investment. But we then have to think about how we finance radiotherapy. And one of the ways that new and complex health interventions have been financed in other disease areas is by combining multiple financing sources. First, by looking at domestic financing, leveraging the expansion of universal health coverage, which is being implemented in many countries around the world, looking at new innovative financing mechanisms, looking at non-traditional lenders, and new partnerships. As well, we can think about guarantees by development banks and public-private partnerships, which are really taking off in many regions of the world. So I'd now like to bring David back to talk a little bit more about some of these innovations.
Okay, so one of the elements in the report was to realize that we made the conclusion that, investing in radiotherapy has a net economic benefit. This is pretty, stunning. And from the point of view of what the conditions and opportunities it creates. And the next one we wanted to think was what innovations can we bring based on those new observations. So I was going to talk a little bit about disruptive approaches and beyond investment. So I decided to frame this in a way that sort of opens up what does a new observation presented to the community do in terms of driving innovation. This is the result that Danielle just went through, and I think it's quite stunning that, and as she points out, that this ongoing investment in radiotherapy, let's say just with the nominal model, this more costly approach, not yet efficient. And if we look at the human capital approach, you see that over time we get a net return. The lives saved are actually contributing economic value back to the country. So it's clear now that we can make the case to different organizations, like finance ministers instead of ministers of health, about the investment in radiotherapy. And what we did in this context from an innovation perspective is we connected two different worlds. When you connect different things, innovation happens. If you believe Stephen Johnson, he has a very interesting book. I've referenced this book before, Where Good Ideas Come From. And he argues that connectivity is the primary engine of creativity and innovation over the past 600 years. And this report connects two different worlds. It connects multiple worlds. And I think it's really powerful, the kind of innovation opportunities that emerge. It connects evidence-based practice. It aligns an outcome for an intervention with a certain kind of technology. What we focused on was CRT technology because we had data performance in terms of outcome for a known technology combination. That's a powerful combination. It has to be consistent for us to make these arguments. It's identified the cost of care. It reduces that to a number that can be calculated, and cost is understood by people like entrepreneurs, like finance people. And it also understood the financial benefit, which allows us to turn the idea of expenditure into an idea around investment. And so this connectivity has the capacity to stimulate innovation. So let's just look at the key messages that come out of this report. Really key messages. Over 24 million cancers per year in 2035. That's not from us, that's from GlobalCan. But that means that there's 200 million fractions of radiotherapy that need to be delivered if we follow the evidence. The trend towards evidence practice, I think, will continue. Some 900,000 lives saved per year. Another message is a little different. There's a long-term market. Radiotherapy is an essential part of effective cancer control in 2035. That means there's going to be a demand for infrastructure, there's going to be a demand for technology, there's going to be a demand for skills and education programs, and there's going to be a demand for novel finance schemes because it's clear that investment makes sense based on the data. So this rolled up as a significant and emerging investment, some $184 billion to be spent in low and middle income countries over the next 20 years for radiotherapy. So what does that mean to some young medical physicist entrepreneur who's thinking about making a technology, or some young educator who says, gee, maybe I should put some courses together? When they put their business together, they're going to think about, this is a huge, market for them to develop these innovations into. We also can push them a little bit in terms of what they need to do. So here's a great technology. Dr. Sharp and Purdy have developed this technology over the years. Is it possible for us, as we pointed out in the efficiency model, is it possible for us to actually lower the cost of radiotherapy? And what does that do? And what does the value of that lowering of cost mean in terms of the feasibility of deploying radiotherapy worldwide? Could we have automated systems? So what we did in an activity-based calculation is we went in and put a whole bunch of automation at the lowest level and saw where that bruised up to in terms of delivery. And so these kinds of things allow us to drop that cost. So it motivates investment in these kinds of things, using a cloud, for example, to share learning and lower infrastructure costs. Or Paul Keel's team from Australia is saying maybe there's a different technological model that could be developed. But the idea of making completely new machines that work in these markets and support, that's fine. But we also need to recognize that the evidence for outcomes needs to match the technology. So if we start coming up with machines that are lower cost but do not match the execution that we link to the outcomes, that has to be carefully examined. Or, the infrastructure elements are very important. How can we more rapidly deploy this? So the group in Germany, for example, demonstrating that their radiotherapy oncology center can operate off of solar power. And many other innovations that could be put together to lower the peak demand costs of these kinds of machines. So we modeled this activity-based elements, and we demonstrated that, in fact, we could lower in low middle-income countries the operating costs by 53% with innovations like these in the ecosystem. Other innovations, including bulk purchasing and longer operating hours, also added up to that 53%. But it creates a very interesting element, the transition from positive or net negative return triggered in some ecosystems based on the development of more efficient radiotherapy execution methods. Education is also needed. I'm not going to spend too much time on this with you. Lots of educators in the audience, but clearly a transition in how we use manpower in these environments, and we achieve care and measure competency. We have a huge, some 215,000 radiotherapy professionals to be trained by 2035. And that's key to quality radiotherapy, so we can claim the benefit. If we're not applying quality radiotherapy, we can't claim the benefit. And so how are we going to approach this? And the article by Julio Frank, which I think has been shown here many times, talks about competency-based approaches. Maybe we really need to think differently. Maybe we need to go to groups like Smarter, who really do things like measure performance very efficiently in people. And rather than drown them in things, even though they know and they're capable, how do we actually get a clearer measurement of performance? Or things like nanodegree, which is a domain coming out in the computer science and programming domain, where people can very rapidly advance their competencies. We need to really think about this. And this is highlighted further in the Lancet report, but I'm going to skip through this in the context of time. Maybe we need to use cloudification to link medical records, learning management systems, and treatment planning systems so we can actually have training inside the technology that we're using every day. Something to lower the cost of these activities. The other element is innovation in leadership and stewardship. And this is a great quote that I have. And a major reason for their slow progress is the no-do gap, the gap between what is known and what gets implemented in low and middle-income countries. They know, but how do you get this gap from know to actually do? And I think we have to really think about innovation in this space. And there's a couple interesting examples. Norm Coleman's ICEC, International Cancer Experts Corps, people working together to educate and coordinate this activity. Medical Physicists Without Borders, headed up in part by Jake Van Dyke, looking to have physicists travel and support the application of safe, effective radiotherapy, or the engagement of youth, like Danielle, and to bring in young leaders and realize that the messages that I showed at the start of this talk, at the start of this last set of slides, are robust and supported by data, and giving them those messages and allowing them to take those messages into the conversations as they move forward and make the case for investment and a clear value benefit. There's also a whole element around financing innovations, which I'm not an expert in, but I thought I would just wrap up with a few points. We've seen in the context of communicable diseases big shifts in how governments and industry are willing to work together to lower costs and achieve objectives. The other one we've seen, for example, in the context of Brazil, when they sold all those machines in Brazil, Brazil negotiated 40% of the parts, accessories, and software to be developed within the country. So other elements of partnership that can be advanced. Or innovative financing instruments. Once you see that it makes sense to put radiotherapy in, you see the opportunity, you can then go make the case to someone for further investment. But we should put together some novel vehicles that allow that to happen. This has been done in other jurisdictions. So in summary, what we've done is we've connected need, value, and cost. And I think that creates a great opportunity for innovation. Young entrepreneurs can see the opportunity. They can make strong cases of benefit and investment based on data. Radiotherapy is an essential component of effective cancer care and provides sound motivation for the investment. That's a very clear message. And we're talking about investment over the next 20 years. Radiotherapy for the next 20 years. Clear future investment for careers, for infrastructure, for innovation, for capital investments, for new technology development. And we believe that the results of this report will attract innovators and entrepreneurs to bring solutions that enable high-quality radiotherapy to benefit the 24 million people per year that will be diagnosed with cancer in 2035. So why is this a trip from Amsterdam to Vienna? Because this was a whirlwind 2-year activity where we launched this task force. Mary's went to the board of the UICC and said, let me explore what the gap is and quantify the gap in radiotherapy support. And so we pulled together a group in Amsterdam, and we went through and got engagement by many organizations, some over 100 people from around the planet are on the task force. And Tracy helped coordinate a lot of this. Norman Kirsten was involved in a lot of it. And we went from that meeting in Amsterdam in 2013, which is kind of a twinkle in the eye activity, all the way through to it being picked up by Lancet Oncology and recognized as a commission and produced a dedicated volume in Lancet Oncology, some 23,000 words, crafted over a period rapidly of 3 weeks between June 25th and July 15th or so. And that process has been remarkable and exciting, and I think a lot of work, led substantially by Mary and many others, to create a very clear message for the world on radiotherapy. Many people to acknowledge. A lot of the task force members, too many to list. You can see them all on the website. The authorship list is shown there actually in the commission itself. But groups like Estro really stood up and helped us get support. We had support from many other organizations, physicists, oncologists, different organizations from around the world that made this happen. The group in Australia, CCOR, the team at Harvard, and Rita Tunes, who really led the key thing around bringing the combination of investment and return, and in collaboration with IE and many others. So that I'd like to close. I'm open for conversation and discussion. We have a good 20 minutes. I'd love to hear questions around how exactly did you calculate the cost? What does it mean in terms of economic benefit? How does this 5-year survival thing work out? Or how do we model the investment? So with that, thank you very much.